The harsh winter wind cut through the Colorado territory like a knife, but Hank Forrester felt nothing as he stared into the dancing flames. His weathered hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from memories that haunted him like ghosts on the prairie. The war between the states had ended 8 years ago, but for Hank, parts of it never would. "You're doing it again," came a soft voice behind him. White River, Colorado Territory, 1873, was nothing more than a scattered collection of wooden buildings and hopeful souls, but to Stella Norwood, it was the chance she'd been searching for. She moved closer, her skirts rustling against the dry grass as she took a seat beside the brooding cowboy. "Doing what?" Hank's voice was rough, like boots on gravel, getting lost in there. Stella nodded toward the campfire, remembering the war. Hank didn't deny it. No point in lying to her. She had an uncanny way of reading him that both comforted and unsettled him. They'd only known each other for 3 weeks, since he'd found her stranded with a broken wagon wheel on the trail to White River. But somehow she saw right through the walls he'd built. "Let it burn, the past, not you," she said, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Some things don't burn so easy." Stella watched him carefully. "I know, but they can in time." Hank had come to Colorado to escape the memories, the nightmares, the faces of men he'd killed and friends he'd lost. He'd signed on with the Double R Ranch outside of White River, hoping the endless work and vast landscapes would somehow scour his soul clean. But the war followed him, especially at night, when the campfire's glow looked too much like burning buildings in Georgia. "You should head back to town," Hank said, poking at the fire with a stick. "It's getting late, and these hills aren't safe after dark." Stella didn't move. "I didn't ride all the way out here to turn back because you're in one of your moods, Mr. Forrester." Despite himself, Hank's mouth quirked upward. Stella Norwood had arrived in White River to take over the town's small schoolhouse after the previous teacher had married and moved east. She was educated, proper, and entirely too stubborn for her own good. "Besides," she continued, "I brought you something." From her satchel, she produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "It's not my birthday," Hank said, eyeing the package suspiciously. "I know that. Just open it." Inside the package was a book, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Hank ran his fingers over the leather cover, surprised. "You mentioned once that you'd read some of his poems during the war," Stella explained. "I thought perhaps better memories might help chase away the darker ones." Hank swallowed hard. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Stella insisted. "Consider it payment for helping me with that wagon wheel." The night Hank had found Stella, she'd been attempting to change the wheel herself, her fine hands smudged with dirt, her face set in determination. He'd been riding back from a cattle drive, tired and ready for his bunk, but something about the sight of her, this clearly out-of-place Eastern woman tackling a job that would challenge most men, had made him stop. "A book seems excessive payment for an hour's work," Hank said, but he didn't try to return it. "Then consider it a gift from a friend," Stella replied. "I don't have many of those here yet." The fire crackled between them, sparks spiraling upward toward the vast blanket of stars. Out here, away from even the modest lights of White River, the night sky was breathtaking. "Why did you really come out here tonight, Miss Norwood?" Stella looked at him directly. "Because Mrs. Hollister mentioned you'd be moving cattle to the north pasture, which means you'd be camping alone, which means you'd be sitting by a fire, remembering things best forgotten." "Mrs. Hollister talks too much," Hank muttered. "She's concerned." "As am I." Hank didn't respond. He wasn't used to being the object of anyone's concern. After the war, he drifted west like so many other broken men, taking work where he could find it, never staying too long in one place. Until White River. Until the double R. Until, if he was honest with himself, he'd met the schoolteacher with eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed defenses. "You don't even know me," he finally said. "I'd like to." The simplicity of her statement caught him off guard. "And I think you'd like to know me too if you'd allow yourself." Before Hank could formulate a response, a sound caught his attention, the distant rumble of hooves. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. "Get behind me," he ordered, rising to his feet. Stella complied without argument. Sensing the change in his demeanor, 3 riders emerged from the darkness, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. Hank recognized them immediately. Trouble from town. Jeb Mercer and his 2 companions, Sam Wilkes and a man everyone just called the Dutchman. "Well now, ain't this cozy?" Mercer drawled, pulling his horse to a stop several yards from the campfire. The war broke Cowboy and the pretty schoolmarm, all alone under the stars. "Evening, Mercer," Hank said evenly. "You're a long way from the saloon." Mercer spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Just passing by, saw your fire." His eyes slid to Stella. "Evening, Miss Norwood. Didn't expect to find you out here." "Mr. Mercer," Stella acknowledged with a tight nod. Hank could feel the tension radiating from her, but she stood tall, showing no fear. It made him admire her even more. "You gentlemen need something?" Hank asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Just being neighborly," Mercer replied. "Though I wonder what the school board would think of their new teacher spending nights out on the range with a cowhand." "I wonder what Sheriff Taylor would think about 3 men harassing a lady after dark," Hank countered. The Dutchman laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet night. "No harassing. Just conversation between neighbors." Hank didn't miss how their horses were positioned spaced apart, giving each man a clear line of fire if needed. Old instincts from the war rose within him, tactical assessments automatic after years of combat. "It's getting late for conversation," Hank said. "I'm sure Miss Norwood would appreciate an escort back to town, though." "I'd rather," Stella began, but Hank cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "I'd be happy to see the lady safely home," Mercer said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That won't be necessary," came another voice from the darkness. Sheriff Daniel Taylor rode into the circle of firelight, his badge catching the glow. "I was just heading back from the Peterson place and saw the gathering. Everything all right here?" Relief washed over Stella, though she tried not to show it. "Perfectly fine, Sheriff. I was just leaving anyway." The sheriff's gaze moved between the 3 mounted men and Hank. "I'll ride with Miss Norwood back to town. You boys heading back too?" It wasn't really a question. Mercer scowled but nodded. "Sure thing, Sheriff. Just saying hello to our friends." As they rode off, Hank caught Mercer's final glance back, a promise that this wasn't over. "Thank you for the book, Miss Norwood," Hank said formally, aware of the sheriff's presence. Stella smiled, understanding his sudden shift in tone. "You're welcome, Mr. Forrester. Perhaps we can discuss it sometime." After they departed, Hank sank back down beside the fire, the Whitman book in his hands. Something had changed tonight. A door had opened that he'd kept firmly shut for years. It terrified him, but for the first time since the war, he felt something other than the dull ache of survival. He opened the book and began to read by firelight, the words speaking to him across time and space, offering a different kind of courage than what he'd needed on the battlefield. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Hank rode into White River with the first light, having decided that the cattle could wait. Something more important needed tending. The town was just coming to life, shopkeepers sweeping their porches, the blacksmith stoking his forge. Hank tied his horse outside the small building that served as White River's schoolhouse. It was early yet. No children would arrive for at least another hour. He hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. Then he heard her voice from inside, reciting something poetry it sounded like. Whitman. The words he'd read by firelight the previous night. Hank knocked softly. The recitation stopped. "Come in," Stella called. She was arranging books on her desk, already dressed for the day in a simple blue dress, her dark hair neatly pinned up. Surprise registered on her face when she saw him. "Mr. Forrester, I didn't expect to see you so soon. I wanted to thank you properly for last night." He twisted his hat in his hands, "and to apologize. Apologize, whatever for not seeing you safely back to town myself." Hank cleared his throat. "It wasn't proper to let you ride back with strangers, even if one was the sheriff." Stella smiled. "Sheriff Taylor is hardly a stranger, and I'm quite capable of looking after myself." "I've noticed that," Hank said with a small smile of his own. "But Mercer and his boys, they've been causing trouble around town. I don't like that they saw you out there." Concern crossed Stella's face. "You think they might cause problems?" Hank chose his words carefully. "I think they're men who look for weakness, and they might see your association with me as exactly that." "My association with you?" Stella raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware we had an association, Mr. Forrester." Her teasing tone lightened something in Hank's chest. "Well, I did fix your wagon wheel, and now you've given me a book. In some parts that practically makes us engaged." The joke surprised them both, and Stella laughed a clear, bright sound that seemed to chase away the lingering shadows in Hank's mind. "In that case," she said, "perhaps you should call me Stella. And I'm Hank, just Hank." A moment of silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something neither was ready to name. "Did you read any of it?" Stella finally asked, nodding toward his saddlebag where the book was safely stored. "Some. It's been a long time since I read anything but cattle brands and wanted posters." Stella's eyes softened. "Education is never wasted, even on cowboys." "Especially on cowboys," Hank corrected. "Most of us could use some civilizing." The sound of children's voices approached outside, signaling the imminent start of the school day. "I should go," Hank said. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right after last night." "I am, thank you." Stella hesitated, then added, "Will you be moving the cattle today?" Hank nodded. "I'll be up in the north pasture for a few days." "And will you be staring into fires and remembering?" The directness of her question took him aback, but he answered honestly, "Probably. Old habits." "Then take the book with you," she said. "Find better memories to dwell on." The first students burst through the door, their chatter filling the small schoolhouse. They stopped short at the sight of a cowboy in their classroom. "Good morning, children," Stella said smoothly. "This is Mr. Forrester. He was just leaving." Hank nodded to the wide-eyed children and moved toward the door. "Miss Norwood," he said formally, then in a lower voice meant only for her, "Stella, thank you again." Outside, mounting his horse, Hank felt lighter than he had in years. The war would always be part of him, the things he'd seen, the men he'd killed, the friends he'd buried. But maybe Stella was right. Maybe he could let the fire burn the past without burning himself in the process. As he rode toward the north pasture, Hank found himself looking forward to the nights ahead, not with dread of the memories that might come, but with anticipation of the words waiting for him in the book, tucked safely in his saddlebag. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Hank moved the cattle, returning to town every few days for supplies. Each time, he found a reason to pass by the schoolhouse, sometimes catching only a glimpse of Stella through the window, other times arriving just as she was dismissing her students for the day. Their conversations were brief, but increasingly comfortable, building upon the connection that had sparked that night by the fire. Hank found himself sharing small stories from his past, not of the war. Not yet, but of his childhood in Tennessee, of his first job breaking horses when he was just 15, of the mentor who had taught him the ways of cattle and rangeland. In return, Stella told him of her life back east, of losing her parents to influenza and finding herself alone at 22, with nothing but her education and determination. She'd seen the advertisement for a teacher in the Colorado Territory and had seized the opportunity for a fresh start. "We have that in common," Hank had observed one afternoon as they walked slowly from the schoolhouse toward the boarding house where Stella rented a room, both looking for new beginnings. "Have you found yours?" Stella had asked. Hank had looked at her then, really looked at her, taking in the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her posture, the softness in her smile. "I'm starting to think I might have." A month after their night by the campfire, Hank rode into White River to find the town in a state of agitation. A group of men stood outside the sheriff's office, their faces grim. Among them was Emmett Russell, owner of the Double R Ranch. "Forrester," Russell called when he spotted Hank. "Good timing." Hank dismounted, leading his horse over to the gathering. "Something wrong, boss?" Russell's weathered face was tight with anger. "Rustlers hit the Wilcox place last night, took nearly 30 head and shot young Jim Wilcox when he tried to stop them." Jim? Hank felt a cold dread. The Wilcox boy was barely 18, eager and hardworking. "Is he?" "Alive, but barely," Sheriff Taylor said. "Doc's with him now." "We're forming a posse," Russell continued. "Taylor thinks it's Mercer and his gang. They've been missing from town for 3 days. The name sent a spike of worry through Hank. "Mercer, you sure?" Taylor nodded grimly. "Got a witness who saw 3 riders heading north with the cattle. Description fits Mercer, Wilkes, and the Dutchman." Hank thought of Stella, of the night Mercer had found them together, of the calculating look in the man's eyes. "When do we ride?" "Within the hour," Russell said. "Get fresh supplies. Could be gone a few days." As the men dispersed to prepare, Hank headed straight for the schoolhouse. Classes would be ending soon. He needed to warn Stella before he left. He found her at her desk, grading papers in the empty classroom. She looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw his expression. "What's happened?" she asked, rising to her feet. Hank explained the situation quickly. "I don't think Mercer would come back to town while the posse is after him, but I wanted to warn you anyway. Be careful until we get back." Concern etched itself across Stella's features. "You're going after them. Isn't that the sheriff's job?" "It's everyone's job out here," Hank said. "A man who'd shoot a boy like Jim Wilcox won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in his way." Stella came around the desk to stand before him. "Then you be careful too, please." The genuine worry in her voice touched something deep within Hank. On impulse, he reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cool and slender within his rough, calloused palm. "I've survived worse," he said softly. "The war," Stella said. "It wasn't a question." Hank nodded. 4 years of it makes a man cautious. Or reckless," Stella countered. "Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks." Hank couldn't help smiling. "Are you concerned for my welfare, Miss Norwood?" "Someone has to be," she replied, but there was no teasing in her tone, just honest concern. Before he could respond, a voice called from the doorway. "Forrester, we're heading out." It was one of the ranch hands from the Double R, already mounted and impatient. "Be right there," Hank called back. To Stella he said, "Stay in town. Keep your doors locked at night." Stella squeezed his hand before releasing it. "Come back safely." "I will," Hank promised, then added with a half-smile, "Still got half of Whitman to read." The pursuit of Mercer and his gang took the posse deep into the rugged country north of White River. The trail was clear at first. 30 cattle left obvious signs, but on the second day, the tracks split. Half the cattle continued north, while the rest veered east toward the mountains. "They're trying to throw us off," Sheriff Taylor said, studying the ground. "Split up to increase their chances of getting away with at least some of the herd." The posse divided as well. Hank went with the sheriff and 3 others following the eastern trail, while Russell led the rest northward. The mountains were treacherous narrow paths along steep drops, dense pine forests where visibility was limited to a few yards. Perfect country for an ambush, Hank thought, his wartime instincts on high alert. Late in the afternoon of the 3rd day, they found the cattle in a high meadow, unguarded. "I don't like this," Hank said quietly to Taylor. "Where are they?" The sheriff scanned the tree line surrounding the meadow, "probably watching us right now." As if on cue, a rifle shot cracked through the air. One of the posse members cried out, clutching his arm as he fell from his horse. "Take cover," Taylor shouted as more shots rang out. Hank dove behind a fallen log, drawing his own rifle. Memories of the war flooded back, the sound of gunfire, the smell of powder, the rush of fear and determination. But this time was different. This time, he had someone waiting for him to return. The firefight was brief but intense. When it was over, the Dutchman lay dead among the pines, and Sam Wilkes was captured, nursing a bullet wound to his leg. But Mercer had escaped during the confusion. "He's probably heading back to link up with the other cattle," Taylor theorized as they bound Wilkes's wounds. "Or he's doubling back toward town," Hank said, voicing the fear that had been growing in his mind. "He knows the posse is out here. Town would be vulnerable." The sheriff's face darkened. "You think he'd go back just to cause trouble, with rustling and attempted murder already on his head?" "I think Mercer's the type who likes to hurt people," Hank said grimly. "And I think he has a particular dislike for me and anyone associated with me." Understanding dawned in Taylor's eyes. "Miss Norwood." Hank was already moving toward his horse. "I'm riding back. Now." "You'll kill your horse at that pace," the sheriff warned. "Then I'll get another when this one gives out." Taylor nodded, making a quick decision. "Go, we'll bring Wilkes and the cattle." "And Hank," he called as Forrester mounted up, "be careful. Mercer's got nothing to lose now." Hank rode as if the devil himself were on his heels. He changed horses at a homestead along the way, leaving his exhausted mount with a promise to return, and pushed on through the night. Dawn was breaking as he approached White River, the town still quiet in the early light. Everything looked peaceful, normal. Perhaps his fears had been unfounded. Then he saw the smoke. It was rising from behind the schoolhouse, thick, black, and deliberate. Hank spurred his borrowed horse forward, heart hammering in his chest. The back of the schoolhouse was engulfed in flames. Townsfolk were already forming a bucket brigade from the nearby well, but the fire was spreading quickly through the dry wooden structure. Hank leapt from his horse, grabbing the nearest person, the blacksmith's apprentice. "Where is Miss Norwood?" The young man pointed toward the boarding house. "Over there with Mrs. Peterson. She's all right but awful upset. Found the schoolhouse like this when she came to open up." Relief washed over Hank, followed immediately by renewed alarm. If Stella was safe, but the schoolhouse was burning, then Mercer was sending a message. And he likely wasn't done. Hank found Stella sitting on the boarding house porch, a blanket around her shoulders despite the morning warmth. Mrs. Peterson, the owner of the boarding house, hovered nearby, clucking with concern. "Stella," Hank called, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. She looked up, her face pale but composed. When she saw him, something like relief flooded her features. "Hank, you're back. Are you all right?" "Did you see who did this?" Stella shook her head. "I arrived to find it already burning, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" There was a note, pinned to the door of the boarding house. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, handing it to Hank. The message was crude but clear. Teacher should be more careful who she keeps company with. This is just the beginning. Next time it won't be an empty building. Cold fury washed through Hank. Where's Mrs. Peterson? The older woman stepped forward. Right here, Mr. Forrester. Is there somewhere safe Miss Norwood can stay? Out of town, perhaps? Mrs. Peterson nodded. My sister has a place about 5 miles east, very remote. I could take her there. No, Stella interjected. I'm not running away. This is my home now. Stella, Hank said firmly, Mercer means business. He's already shot a man and stolen 30 head of cattle. Burning down a schoolhouse is nothing to him. All the more reason for me to stay, she insisted. I won't let him terrorize this town or its children. Hank recognized the determination in her eyes, the same look she'd had when he first found her struggling with that wagon wheel. But this wasn't a broken axle. This was a dangerous man with a vendetta. At least stay inside today, Hank pleaded. The sheriff and the others will be back by tomorrow with Wilkes in custody. We can figure out what to do then. Stella reluctantly agreed, though her expression made it clear she wasn't happy about it. Hank spent the day helping to secure what could be salvaged from the schoolhouse and organizing a watch rotation with the men remaining in town. By nightfall, White River was as prepared as it could be, though tension hung in the air like the lingering smell of smoke. As darkness fell, Hank made his way back to the boarding house. He decided to keep watch from the porch through the night, not trusting Mercer to stay away just because the town was alert. Stella found him there, sitting in a rocking chair with his rifle across his lap. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat in the chair beside him. You should be inside, he said, though he was glad for her company. I couldn't sleep anyway. Stella gazed out at the darkened street. When I came west, I expected hardship, primitive conditions, even some danger from the elements. But I never expected this kind of malice. Hank sipped the coffee. Men like Mercer exist everywhere. The difference out here is there's more space for them to operate, fewer laws to constrain them. Is that why you came west? For the freedom? The question hung in the air between them. Hank considered his answer carefully. Not freedom to do wrong, he finally said. Freedom from memories, from judgments, from a place where every street corner, every face reminded me of what happened, what I did. Stella turned to look at him directly. What did you do, Hank? The war. She was asking about the war, the thing they'd danced around for weeks. I killed men, he said simply. A lot of them. Got good at it, too good maybe. You were a soldier. It was war. It was more than that. Hank set the coffee cup down, the memories rising like smoke from a banked fire. I was a scout for the Union. Moved behind enemy lines, gathered intelligence, sometimes eliminated threats. Understanding dawned in Stella's eyes. An assassin. That's a fancy word for it, but yeah. I could move quietly, shoot straight, and I knew the South grew up there before moving to Pennsylvania with my uncle as a boy. Hank stared into the darkness. Did things I never thought I'd be capable of, things that haunt me still. Stella was quiet for a long moment. Hank waited for the judgment, the revulsion. It never came. Is that what you see in the fire? She asked instead. The faces of those men, Hank nodded. Them, and the friends I lost, the towns I saw burn. Sometimes I think the whole country was on fire and parts of me burned away with it. Stella reached over and took his hand, her touch anchoring him to the present. But you survived. You're here. That has to mean something. Does it? I believe we all have purpose, Stella said firmly, even when we can't see it ourselves. A sound from the street interrupted them, hoofbeats approaching slowly. Hank was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. Inside, he ordered. Now. For once, Stella didn't argue. She slipped through the door as Hank moved to the edge of the porch, using a support post for cover. A lone rider came into view, moving at a walk. Even in the dim light of the quarter moon, Hank recognized Jeb Mercer's lanky form. "I know you're there, Forrester," Mercer called, stopping in the middle of the street. "Come on out where I can see you." Hank stepped forward, rifle aimed squarely at Mercer's chest. "That's far enough, Mercer." "Now, is that any way to greet a neighbor?" Mercer's voice was slurred. He'd been drinking, which made him even more dangerous. "You're no neighbor. You're a rustler and an arsonist. And the sheriff's got Sam Wilkes in custody, so he'll be confirming that any day now." Mercer spat. "Sam's a coward, always was. What do you want, Mercer?" "Just came to have a word with the pretty schoolteacher." Mercer swayed slightly in his saddle. "Seems her place of employment had an unfortunate accident. Wanted to express my condolences." "Miss Norwood isn't receiving visitors," Hank said coldly. "Especially not the kind who burn down schoolhouses." Mercer laughed, an ugly sound in the quiet night. "You think you're protecting her? You're the reason she's in danger, Forrester. You and your union blew past." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. How did Mercer know about his service? As if reading his mind, Mercer continued, "Oh yes, I know all about Captain Henry Forrester, the scout who moved like a ghost through Confederate lines. My brother told me all about you before he died with your knife in his throat." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "Mercer, Thomas Mercer. From Virginia." "His little brother Jeb," Mercer confirmed with a mocking bow. "Taken me years to track you down, Captain. Almost gave up till I saw your name on the register at the land office when you signed on with Russell." The past Hank had tried so hard to outrun had finally caught up with him. Thomas Mercer had been a Confederate officer and a spy for the Union. When his cover was discovered, Hank had been sent to extract him. But the mission went wrong. Thomas was mortally wounded, and Hank had been forced to end his suffering quickly before escaping himself. "Your brother was a brave man," Hank said evenly. "He saved a lot of Union lives." "He was a traitor to the cause," Mercer snarled, "but he was still my brother. And you're going to pay for what you did." "It won't bring him back," Hank said. "Nothing will. The war's over, Mercer." "Not for me it ain't." Mercer's hand moved toward his holster. "Don't," Hank warned. "I've got the drop on you, maybe. But how many people in this town will die while you're trying to protect your schoolteacher?" Mercer's lips twisted in a cruel smile. "I can be very patient, very creative." The boarding house door opened behind Hank. "That's enough," came Stella's voice, steady and clear. Hank didn't take his eyes off Mercer. "Get back inside, Stella." She moved to stand beside him instead. "No, I won't hide while this man threatens our town." "Our town," Mercer laughed. "You've been here, what, 2 months? This ain't your town, lady, and soon enough it won't be Forrester's either. He'll be dead or gone, your choice which." "You're assuming he's alone," Stella said calmly. "He's not." As if on cue, several doors along the street opened. Men emerged with rifles and shotguns, the blacksmith, the general store owner, the barkeeper, and others, all trained on Mercer. Stella continued, "Word spreads quickly in a small town, Mr. Mercer, especially when someone burns down the schoolhouse where people's children learn." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Mercer's face. He was outnumbered, outgunned. "This is your one chance to ride away," Hank said quietly. "The sheriff will be back tomorrow with your friend Wilkes. The law will deal with you for the rustling and for shooting Jim Wilcox. But this, your personal vendetta against me, ends tonight." Mercer's eyes darted around, assessing the situation. For a moment, Hank thought he might actually turn and leave. Then Mercer's hand dropped to his gun. The shot echoed down the street before Mercer could clear his holster. He toppled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder where Hank's bullet had struck him. "Next one goes through your heart," Hank said, already reloading. "Make your choice." Cursing, Mercer raised his uninjured hand in surrender. The blacksmith and store owner moved forward to disarm him and bind his wound. "Lock him in the storeroom at the sheriff's office," Hank instructed. "Post guards. Sheriff Taylor will deal with him when he gets back." As the men dragged Mercer away, Hank finally lowered his rifle. Beside him, Stella let out a shaky breath. "Are you all right?" he asked, suddenly aware of how pale she looked. "I should be asking you that," she replied. "He came here for you, not me, but he targeted you to get to me." The guilt of it weighed heavily on Hank. "I'm sorry, Stella. I never meant to bring danger to your door." Stella looked at him for a long moment, then reached up to touch his face. "We don't get to choose our pasts, Hank, only how we face them when they catch up to us." Her eyes were steady on his. "And you faced yours with courage." The simple truth of her words washed over him. For years, he'd been running from what he'd done, who he'd been. Maybe it was time to stop. "Let it burn, the past, not you," Stella said softly, echoing her words from that night by the fire. "Remember." Hank covered her hand with his own. "I remember." Around them, the townspeople were dispersing now that the excitement was over. Mrs. Peterson hovered in the doorway of the boarding house, concern etched on her face. "Come inside, both of you," she called. "I've got coffee on, and Mr. Forrester looks like he could use a hot meal after all that riding." "You should go in," Hank said to Stella. "Get some rest." "Will you come too?" she asked. "I don't think either of us should be alone right now." The invitation held more than just a request for company, Hank knew. It was an acknowledgement of something growing between them, something neither had fully named yet. "I'd like that," he said simply, in Mrs. Peterson's warm kitchen, over coffee and hastily prepared sandwiches. Hank told Stella the full story of Thomas Mercer and that fateful night in Virginia. He spoke of other missions too, other faces that haunted his dreams. And for the first time, the telling didn't feel like reopening a wound, it felt like cleaning one so it could finally heal. Stella listened without judgment, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finally fell silent, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me with this." "I've never told anyone," Hank admitted. "Not even the men I worked with on the ranch. It's a heavy burden to carry alone. It felt like the only way, until now." Mrs. Peterson, who had tactfully busied herself in the far corner of the kitchen, chose that moment to announce she was retiring for the night. "Don't stay up too late," she admonished with a meaningful look at their joined hands. "It's been quite a day for both of you." After she left, a comfortable silence settled between them. Hank was the first to break it. "What happens now?" he asked. "The schoolhouse is gone." "We'll rebuild it," Stella said without hesitation. "Bigger and better than before. The children need education now more than ever. We—" A smile touched her lips. "This is my home now, Hank. These people, this town, they stood up tonight, not just for me, but for what's right. I won't abandon that." Hank nodded slowly. "And us? What happens with us?" The directness of the question surprised them both. But they were beyond pretense now, beyond the careful dance they'd been performing since that first night by the fire. "That depends," Stella said carefully, "on whether you're staying or running." "I'm done running," Hank said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I thought I needed to keep moving to outrun the past, but maybe what I really needed was a reason to stand still." Stella's eyes softened. "And have you found one?" "I believe I have." Hank squeezed her hand gently. "If she'll have me." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sheriff Taylor returned with the recovered cattle and Sam Wilkes in custody. Jeb Mercer was charged with rustling, arson, and attempted murder. The town held a meeting and voted unanimously to rebuild the schoolhouse before winter set in. Hank threw himself into the construction, working alongside the other men of White River. His skills as a carpenter, learned in his youth before the war, proved invaluable. Stella organized the children to continue their lessons in the church while the new building took shape. They saw each other daily now, their connection deepening with each passing day. Sometimes they spoke of serious things: his war experiences, her hopes for the school, the future they both cautiously began to envision. Other times they simply enjoyed each other's company, discovering shared interests in literature, music, and the simple beauty of the Colorado wilderness. 2 months after the night Mercer had confronted them, the new schoolhouse stood complete. Larger than before, with big windows to let in light and a small apartment at the back for the teacher, a luxury Stella hadn't expected. The town council decided you should have proper accommodations, Emmett Russell explained at the dedication ceremony. Can't have our teacher staying in a boarding house forever. The townspeople had gathered to celebrate, bringing food and drink, making the occasion festive despite the chill of late autumn. Children ran excitedly through the new building, claiming desks and examining the fresh blackboards and maps. Hank found Stella standing alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," she said as he joined her. "Better than I ever imagined." "You deserve it," Hank replied. "You've given this town something it desperately needed." "We all did this," Stella corrected him. "Together." Hank nodded, suddenly nervous about what he'd come to say. He'd rehearsed the words a dozen times, but now that the moment was here, they seemed inadequate. "I've been thinking," he began. Stella turned to him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "That sounds dangerous." "It might be." Hank took a deep breath. "I've put in my notice at the Double R." Surprise registered on her face. "You're leaving?" "No, staying." Hank met her gaze directly. "But changing jobs. The general store needs a manager since old Mr. Jenkins is retiring. He offered me the position." "That's wonderful, Hank, but what about ranching? I thought that was your life." "It was what I did, not who I am." Hank moved closer to her. "Who I am is a man who's finally stopped running from his past, a man who's found something worth building a future for." Understanding dawned in Stella's eyes. "And what future might that be?" Instead of answering directly, Hank reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had this sent from Denver," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. "It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Stella interrupted, her voice suddenly breathless. "I haven't asked the question yet," Hank pointed out with a smile. "Then ask it." Around them, the celebration continued, but in that moment, they might have been the only two people in White River. "Stella Norwood, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." As Hank slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted from behind them. They turned to find the entire town watching from the schoolhouse doorway, broad grins on every face. "About time," called Mrs. Peterson, leading a round of applause. Hank and Stella exchanged startled glances, then burst into laughter. "No secrets in a small town," Hank murmured. "I wouldn't have it any other way," Stella replied, leaning up to kiss him as the applause grew louder. They were married that Christmas in the newly completed church, with snow falling gently outside and the entire population of White River in attendance. Sheriff Taylor stood as Hank's best man, while Mrs. Peterson beamed proudly from the front row. After the ceremony, they moved into the small apartment behind the schoolhouse, a temporary arrangement while Hank worked on building them a proper home on a piece of land he'd purchased at the edge of town. It was modest but comfortable, and filled with books, his growing collection of poetry and history, her treasured volumes on education and literature. Spring arrived with a rush of green across the Colorado wilderness. The cattle drives began again, though now Hank watched them from the porch of the general store he managed rather than from horseback. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Stella was there beside him, her presence a balm to the old wounds. One evening in late April, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Stella had news to share, news that both thrilled and terrified her. "Hank," she began, "I've been to see Dr. Wilson today." Concern immediately crossed his face. "Are you ill?" "No." Stella smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "Just the opposite, in fact." Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. "You mean?" "Yes." Stella's eyes shimmered with unshed tears of joy. "We're going to have a baby come autumn." Hank stared at her in wonder, emotions too powerful for words washing through him. He had never imagined this life for himself, had never believed he deserved such happiness after the things he'd done. "Are you happy?" Stella asked, a trace of uncertainty in her voice. In answer, Hank gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "More than I ever thought possible," he whispered against her hair. Later that night, as Stella slept peacefully beside him, Hank slipped quietly from their bed and went to sit on the porch. The night was cool but not cold, the sky ablaze with stars. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the valley. Hank built a small fire in the pit they'd constructed for such evenings, watching as the flames licked upward toward the heavens. Once, such a sight would have triggered memories he couldn't bear: buildings burning in Atlanta, campfires before battles where friends who wouldn't survive the dawn shared their last cups of coffee. Now, he saw only the beauty of it, the warmth, the light, the promise of new beginnings. "I thought I might find you out here," came Stella's voice from the doorway. She joined him by the fire, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "Did I wake you?" Hank asked, pulling her close against the night air. "No, the baby did," Stella said with a soft laugh. "Already active, it seems." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. After a while, Stella spoke again. "You're not remembering, are you? The war?" Hank shook his head. "Not tonight. Tonight I'm thinking about the future, our future." "What do you see in that future?" she asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "Everything I never thought I'd have," Hank replied honestly. "A home, a family, peace." Stella smiled, taking his hand and entwining their fingers. "The fire burned away the past," she said softly, "just like I told you it could." "You were right," Hank acknowledged. "But it wasn't just the fire that did it. It was you. You showed me there was something worth living for beyond survival." "We showed each other," Stella corrected gently. "I came west looking for purpose, for a place to belong. I found both and so much more with you." As the fire burned low, turning to glowing embers in the pit, Hank reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the battlefields of a war that had nearly destroyed him to this peaceful porch in a small Colorado town, with the woman he loved by his side and a child on the way. The path had been long and often painful, but every step had led him home. "I love you, Stella," he said simply. "And I love you, Hank," she replied, her voice carrying the same certainty that had drawn him to her from the beginning. Together, they watched the fire burn down to ashes, not in remembrance of what was lost, but in celebration of all they had found. 5 years later, White River had grown from a small settlement into a thriving town. The railroad had come through the valley, bringing new settlers, new businesses, and new opportunities. The schoolhouse, where Stella had once taught alone, now employed 3 teachers, though she remained the headmistress, beloved by students and parents alike. Hank's general store had prospered as well, expanding to include a post office and telegraph station. Their home on the edge of town, built with Hank's own hands, was now surrounded by a garden Stella tended lovingly, and filled with the laughter of their children. 4-year-old Thomas, named in a gesture of healing for the brother Jeb Mercer had lost, and 2-year-old Elizabeth, who had her mother's eyes and her father's determined spirit. On the anniversary of their wedding day, Hank took Stella back to the spot where they had first truly connected, the campsite where he had stared into the fire remembering the war, and she had told him to let it burn, the past, not him. They made the journey on horseback, leaving the children in Mrs. Peterson's capable care. The day was clear and cold, perfect for riding through the golden aspen groves and pine forests surrounding White River. When they reached the clearing, Hank was struck by how unchanged it seemed, as if the land itself had preserved this spot where his life had taken such a momentous turn. "You remember?" he asked as they dismounted. Stella smiled, looking around the clearing. "Of course. I brought you Whitman, and you looked at me like I'd handed you a live rattlesnake." Hank laughed. "I was a fool." "No," Stella disagreed, moving to stand in the exact spot where they had sat that night years ago. "You were a man in pain, a good man who carried too much for too long." Hank began gathering wood for a fire, just as he had done that night. "I still have the book, you know. It's getting rather worn." "The best books always do," Stella replied, helping him arrange the kindling. "The best marriages, too, I suppose." Hank paused in his work to really look at her. 5 years of marriage had only deepened his love for this remarkable woman. The fresh-faced schoolteacher who had arrived in White River with nothing but determination and hope had become a pillar of their community, a loving mother and the center of his world. "What?" Stella asked, noticing his gaze. "Just thinking how lucky I am," Hank replied honestly. "We both are," she said, her eyes reflecting the love he felt. As the sun began to set, they built the fire together, then sat side by side watching the flames grow. Hank reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a package, a new edition of Whitman, bound in fine leather. "Happy anniversary," he said, presenting it to her. Stella's eyes widened in delight. "Hank, it's beautiful." She opened the cover to find an inscription he had carefully written on the flyleaf. "To my beloved Stella, who taught me that the past need not define the future." "All my love always, Hank." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she read the words. "I love it, and I love you." She reached into her own saddlebag and withdrew a package of her own, smaller, wrapped in simple brown paper. "I have something for you, too." Hank unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather-bound journal. Opening it, he found page after page of Stella's neat handwriting. "What is this?" he asked, turning the pages with curiosity. "Our story," Stella explained, "from the day we met until now. I've been writing it bit by bit over the years." She touched the cover gently. "So our children will know someday how their father found his peace and their mother found her home." Hank was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. He had spent so many years trying to outrun his past, to forget. Now Stella had given him a past worth remembering. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. As darkness fell around them, they sat by the fire, reading aloud from both books Whitman's timeless verses and the story of their own lives, intertwined. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces, but there were no ghosts in those shadows now. Only light, only warmth, only love. "You know," Hank said as the fire burned low, "I think we should make this a tradition, coming back here every year." Stella nodded, her head resting against his shoulder. "To remember, not the war," Hank clarified, "but this, us, how it all began." "I'd like that," Stella said softly. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, bright against the velvet darkness of the Colorado night. The same stars had shone down on battlefields where men had died, on prairies where cattle grazed, on small towns reaching toward the future. on a man and woman who had found in each other the courage to face the past and the strength to build something new from its ashes. "Let it burn the past, not you," Stella had told him once. In the gentle wisdom of those words, Hank Forrester had found not just healing, but redemption. Not just peace, but joy. And as they sat together by the fire they had built with their own hands, that joy burned brighter than any flame, warming them against the cool night air and illuminating the path that stretched before them, a path they would walk together, hand in hand, into whatever future awaited.